I'd like to welcome you to the first lecture in the Fraser Center for Workplace Issues series of 2025-2026. I am Elizabeth Bell, Director of Labor at Wayne. We have an exciting year ahead, so it's great to see you all. This event today is sponsored by the Fraser Center, but also by the REUTHER Library. And I personally want to thank Jamie McQuaid and Sean Bryan for helping us organize this event. I have the singular honor today of introducing Naomi R Williams, Associate Professor, Labor Studies and Employment Relations at the Rutgers School of Management and Labor Relations. It will be presenting on the recent book, A Blueprint for Worker Solidarity, Class Politics and Community in Wisconsin. I had the pleasure of serving on a panel of the 2024 Organization of American Historians with Naomi and other labor educators. So it is indeed a great pleasure that she can join us today. Williams received their PhD in history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Their primary research interests include labor and working class history, urban history, and politics, gender, women, race and politics, and more broadly, social and economic movements of working people. I could also quote a discredited historian. She's interested in the question, why is there air? These are reflected in their book and in subsequent scholarship. You're all too young to know this, but my brother was considerably older than me, was a big fan of Bill Cosby. He had an entire album called Why Is There Air? These interests are reflected in their book and in subsequent scholarship. The book, A Blueprint for Worker Solidarity, uses life stories of union leaders and labor community resources to examine the transformation of class identity and politics in the mid to late 20th century. Along with several other editors, Naomi also co-edited A Racial Reckoning in Industrial Relations, Storytelling as Revolution from Within, which is published by Cornell University Press. And they co-authored a chapter with Jeevan Park called Building Labor Solidarity Across Tenure Lines, which is published in the volume Contingent Faculty in the Remaking of Higher Education, A Labor History, also published in 2024. This chapter argues that to save the public good function of higher education, cross-faculty organizing and mobilizing is necessary to protect the role of faculty and expand democracy in colleges and universities. As a whole, Naomi's work focuses on worker voice and late capitalism at the end of the 20th century and examines the ways working people impact local and national political economies and the ways workers participate in collaborative social justice movements. They engage working class history in urban settings, looking at low-wage service work, industrial employment, and workers in higher education. In other words, they are interested in everything that we are interested in too. Please welcome Professor Naomi Williams.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to say a special thank you to Labor at Wayne, to Liz and Sean and Jamie. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for coming today. This is a huge honor for me, honestly. Sorry. I saw there's one person I couldn't make eye contact with, and I was like, okay, let me shift a little bit there. When I was working on this project, I was here at the REUTHER Library and Archives, doing a lot of work looking into UAW Local 180, which I'll tell you about later, and SEIU, which is a service workers union. And it felt so good to be just sitting here with all of this evidence, to have access to it, to be able to take a month and a half to just really dive into what workers were thinking about and doing. And so this is my very first book talk about this book after it came out. And to be able to do it here at the REUTHER Library at Wayne State just really means a lot to me. So thank you all for coming. I also want to thank Gary Huck, who is a labor cartoonist, internationally known labor cartoonist, award-winning, and he very graciously designed the cover for me. And that is also a huge honor. And I want to thank the people who got this together, the folks who I saw bringing in the food. Thank you for that. I want to thank Benita Gaynor, my partner who came up from Florida, who could be enjoying life in retirement and said, no, I'll hear one more story about how those workers in Racine can help us change the world today. Sure, 12 years, finally it's out, it's in print, it doesn't exist. I don't think she's read it yet, but that's okay. There you go. The one that 12 years. Brand spanking new, brand spanking new. Okay, so today, more than ever, right now, we need to be cultivating community. Too many forces are seeking to divide us, to tear us apart, to say that there's nothing that we have in common, to internalize all of the conflict and all of the lack of access to economic security, as if it's some personal failure. We need to stop that, and the only way we can do that is to build connections where people tell us there aren't any. That's what worker activists did in Racine. They started way before the origins of this book. The book goes from, I know this, from the 1940s to the 1980s, right? But there's actually a prehistory there. And I came to this story because what I was learning in my college classrooms didn't match my lived experience. I basically grew up in South Louisiana, and my family and my neighbors were members of coalitions of folks, multiracial coalitions, workers who were very active in the environmental justice movement, workers across racial lines, workers in chemical plants, and teachers and postal workers. And we all got together to protect each other. But then when I was in class and I'm learning about, working people in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, they're like, people didn't get along, unions didn't pay attention to what was happening in the community, nobody was organizing workers, white folks didn't talk to black folks, and there were only two races. And so all of this stuff, I was like, why doesn't this really make sense? And when I got to graduate school, I said, I want to tell a story about people I know and who look familiar to me. And actually, I will say in my master's program, I took a class on oral history, and it opened my eyes. It's like, oh, here are the stories that I'm not getting in the textbook, right? It's real workers who are sharing their experiences. And I learned so much, even looking back all the way to the period of enslavement, right? So looking at slavery, those testimonies, before there was a United States, those testimonies, right? And then my lived experience, I'm like, okay, I see this. And so what I did is I wanted to talk to workers who were active in the 70s and 80s and to tell their stories, to say, okay, does it match what the literature says is going on, or is it something different, right? And so a sociologist told me about these service workers who were working at a hospital in Racine, Wisconsin. Y'all know Racine, right? Across Lake Michigan over there. It's a powerhouse of union activity, right? And in 1976, there were hospital workers, they call them the nursing assistants, right? So now they would be CNAs, right? Nursing assistants and dietary workers and facilities workers, people who cleaned up, janitors, things like that. Mostly Black and brown women. They went on strike. They had just very recently got the right to join a union, right? They're working in a public hospital. They were excluded from the Wagner Act, right? So law passed, they were able to organize. SEIU came right in and said, okay, we got you, come sign this union card. And then SEIU disappeared. And so workers like, we're working full time. We still qualify for welfare. We're struggling. We're exhausted. We don't have any say over our working conditions. We want something more. And so they were asking for things like what all workers always ask for: more dignity at work, the ability to work a full-time job, go home to their families and still live and thrive, right? And the hospital came back with a 1 cent wage. We'll raise your hourly pay from, like, this is an estimate, but it's basically $2.74 to $2.75 an hour in 1970. Right? And the women said no. And the union leader, right, it's SEIU, Local 150 at the time, was a statewide local. So every union member who belonged to that local was across the state. It was based in Milwaukee, so right there, like down the street, right? But union leadership really had no time for these hospital workers. But they insisted. And so when the president of the union signed a deal with hospital management behind their back, they refused to go to work. And they said no, they weren't going to do it. And some auto workers, or UAW workers, I should say, so they were members of United Auto Workers. They actually worked in a tractor manufacturing company. Y'all know J.I. Case. They worked for Case now, Case Harvester, IH International. After so many millions of mergers, who knows, right? But those UAW workers at Case were like, we got to step in and help these workers out. And so their headlines, and this is what the sociologist showed me. She showed me newspaper articles with women on walking the picket line and all these big white guys holding these signs saying everybody deserves fair wages, right? And these are they're getting paid more than anybody else in the city, and they're taking the time to walk the picket line. And I was like, this is the story. She's like, yeah, that's the story. Well, I'm gonna jump to the end. Historians always like to use spoilers, right? We tell you right up front what we're gonna do. So I'm gonna tell you that in the 1990s, these women lost their union. The hospital managed to send them through a decertification campaign. And they lost their union, and these women, and it was a long process in the hospital industry. This matters because this is kind of something that we're seeing right now today. In the hospital industry, they're like, we have all of these workers who are nursing assistants, and they're getting all of these rights at work, right? And so we need to do something about it. So they started demanding certifications. So women who have been working in these jobs for 20, 30 years, training other people, training nurses, right, doing all of this, suddenly they weren't skilled, right? So these very skilled jobs became unskilled. And then, okay, so you have to get certification. And so now you're asking 40 and 50-year-old women to go back to school to get the certificate to say that they can work in their job that they've been working in, and raise their families and all. And so a lot of them got pushed out of the industry because of that. And so they're smaller numbers, they're outsourcing laundry, they're outsourcing food, catering services and things like that. And so the membership gets smaller and smaller, and so they're able to decertify the union, right? But back then, in 1976, UAW was like, let's do something about this. And there were at that point, a little over 50 different UAW locals, mostly in small manufacturing companies at the time. And it wasn't just UAW workers, but also the postal workers and the teachers. Everybody was like, okay, let's do something. So they invited the hospital workers to their union hall overseeing labor dispute, and they said, let's talk to you. We have some money. We have a great union lawyer, and he does great negotiation work. Let's get the bargaining team together with the lawyer and go back to management. And so those images and the story, I'm skipping ahead and I'm not reading my notes. So I'll go back to the story to say, the whole reason I told you about the decertification drive, right, was that these women lost their jobs in the 90s and they ended up on welfare. Well, some of them were already, but they ended up dependent on welfare, right? Dependent on welfare, and they became activists in the welfare rights movement, which was taking off at the time. which is why the sociologist knew the story, is because she was like, why are y'all all so engaged and how'd you know what to do? And you're like, we're union members. Of course we know what to do, right? Like, we got this. And so that inspired me to find out more about what was happening in Racine and say, okay, how far back do I have to go to tell a story? Being a small industrial town, I was like, okay, there are lots of different unions here. I can look at a lot of different workplaces. I can see what's going on in the community. And it's really part of my methodology that I developed is oral history, right? Hearing stories directly from workers, and not just about their job and their work, but about their lives, who they are, their families, where they're from. So life histories, and really creating and using the archive. And so the beautiful thing about being at the REUTHER Library is that in their archive, there are generations of people's stories about their lives and what they do for work here. It's just a beautiful resource. I also found histories that people had collected in the 60s, 70s, and 80s at the Wisconsin Historical Society. So I also used those, and then I got to talk to people as well. Oral history, that's one of my main methodologies. The other is local history. Being able to tell a story from a particular position within the larger context of what's happening in the United States, what's happening in the region, what's happening in the world, right? But you can really dig down deep in a particular community and see the environment that's playing out there, what's happening in politics, what's happening in school, what are the debates, what are they listening to on the radio, what concerts are they going to, what baseball are they, what baseball teams are they supporting, like where do they find communities? And so local history is really important to me because I don't think that's what happened, right? You get your textbook, which is a distilled version of what happened across this whole decade, right? In what chapter. You can't cover what's going on in a local story. And then that becomes the narrative. And you miss the detail of what's happening in particular places. And I think Racine is really important. It stands out because it's not just a small industrial town in the Midwest. It's a small industrial town in the Midwest that has diversified manufacturing. It has a long history of organizing, not just in manufacturing, right? Because there's this glorification as if manufacturing workers are the workers and they're the only workers that exist. And that's part of the how do we tell a quick story about what's happening. But you had public workers who were organizing before there was a law allowing them to organize public workers. So in the 1920s, 1930s, public workers in Racine were organized. You had garment workers, you had steel workers, the leather manufacturing, malted milk. Somebody can explain that to me. Crayons, the Crayola company, Rain Fair, small household products, so Hamilton Beach, all of these different places. And then you had the foundries that were creating the equipment for the car manufacturers in the different parts of the city, in Milwaukee, in Janesville, right? So, and they were shipping out. So there are lots of different workplaces. And just about every place, every manufacturing workplace in the city had a union, except for Johnson Wax. That was the one ununion workplace in the period that I studied from 40s to 80s, right? And so there are this wide range of unions, of different types of unions. And I shouldn't forget the Teamsters, and should never, of course, forget farm workers, because that farm alliance really played out really well for them in Southeast Wisconsin. It really built a coalition of folks when they, this really mattered in the 1950s, because Racine activists were very prominent in developing the Democratic Party in Wisconsin, right? So if it wasn't for progressives within the Republican Party and farmers, they wouldn't have been able to build a big enough base to sustain a Democratic Party in Wisconsin, in the state of Wisconsin. And so that came about in the 1940s and became very useful later, as I'll get to in a moment. But I'm not going to spend too much time because I actually really want to have a conversation with you. I'm just going to set the framework for why this is a blueprint for what we can do today to build community, right? And part of it is this ability that they saw very early. It was important. It didn't matter if you were at a manufacturing plant or if you were a teacher or a janitor, you needed to be in the union or beer, right? You needed to be in the union. Right? So that was really important, early and broad organizing. And then also Black workers. Black workers had been in Racine since Racine became a place. But really during the Great Migration period, more and more Black workers started coming. And then with the pull of World War II, a lot of folks, because typically they would stop in Chicago and then they say, oh, let's keep going to Milwaukee. And they're like, oh, wait, something's happening right here. So between Chicago and Milwaukee, here's this spot for us. And so starting in the 1930s, 1940s, it really explodes. So population goes from about 500 to 600 Black folks to thousands of Black folks by the mid-1940s. And a lot of the Black workers who were coming up from the South were recruited as strike breakers. But many of them had been, especially the ones coming from Alabama, they were working in steel and they were unionized. Or they were coming from West Virginia from the coal and they were unionized. They're like, we don't break strikes, right? But also they got here and unions were excluding them. So they're like, wait, we didn't take your job and you still don't want to work with us. But it really created an atmosphere and it turned into a small cadre of 4 or 5 Black workers who they were friends, they went to high school together. They worked in a foundry, and in foundries, right, it's a very hot, dangerous job. And the core room is the hottest, most dangerous job. Highest turnover ever. When there were job openings, those were jobs that the Black guys were getting. And I should say at this point, Black women were pretty much excluded from manufacturing and clothing production in Racine at this time. Black women were restricted to, like, they were only hired for domestic work, right, for care work during this time. So these guys got together and said, okay, we got to stick together, we got to make something work. And they actually really pushed and really fought hard to gain a space. And then they used their space, they used their power of their positions, right? So working in a core room, if you weren't producing product for the rest of the shop, everything was shut down. So union leaders knew they had to come and they had to get these guys outside in order to, if they were gonna win any work stoppage, right? Because otherwise it would just flood all the other positions. So soon they started to realize, wait a minute, we got a little bit of power here. And then they used that power. They used that power to say, what we're doing here isn't quite right. And so over 2 generations, it's really quite beautiful to see. And that's the value of like looking at this small section, right? I can really tell, I can go through, I'm reading the notes from the minutes. And it's like, oh, well, we can't have our dinner at that restaurant because, you know, they don't serve Black people there. And now we got Black people on the board. They're like, oh. And so like that was like, and you actually typed that up. Like, okay. I want to know the like the parts of the competition that didn't get typed up into the minute notes, right? That's the fun part of being a historian, going back through the records, right? It was really cool though, and to see it, and like it wasn't a Black guy who said that actually. But I know, like Tony said that in the meeting because he's friends with Bill. And Bill's on the board. And so he did the thing, right? He's like, I should speak up at this point. And he spoke up at that point. And it was just really, really cool. I didn't get a chance to interview Tony, but I got to interview his son, Tom. And he's an amazing guy. And so all of the workers I did talk to mentioned Tony. And over their lives of working in Racine, like he was somebody that everybody recognized. And I actually got to meet his granddaughter and just be like, your grandmother's like a hero. She's like, wait, what? Her dad was like, yeah, you know, by the time she was like old enough to get to know him, like he was like really old and tired. Like she didn't get to really know him, but I was like, oh, your grandfather's like a rock star. But so the Black workers really use their voice at particular moments to change the politics, the working class politics in the city, to be more responsive to race. And it just really fueled a type of who else is in here? Who else do we need to be considering? And So Bill's a Black guy whose family moved to Racine in 1916, 1918. Don't quote me, it's in there. But somewhere around there in the teens, right? And he went to high school, and he admitted, right, he was a sports star, and he admitted that he didn't go to college because he was afraid of discrimination. And he knew that being in town was safe. Then his father passed away, and he was like, "Oh, well, I gotta stay." He was the oldest. I gotta stay and help the family. And so he got a job, and he's like, why I got really involved is because after World War II, we're in a meeting, and the company had pulled in guest workers from Jamaica, and they were helping out in the foundry. And the other guys were worried. They're like, they're cutting jobs. We gotta get rid of these guest workers. And somebody said something like, well, let's ship them back. We'll do whatever we can to push them out. Like, we'll put them in cattle cars. And when the guy said it in the meeting, Bill jumped up. He was like, no, you can't. He's like, I lost my top. I just started cussing. I never do that. I just started cussing. He was a short guy, he was really big, but like not very tall, but powerful, a powerful guy. And people listened to him. And he's like, and that's when people started coming to me. Then for real, and I knew like I needed to use my voice. And he remembered, he's like, when I was in high school, he was the star of his football team. He was the only Black player on the team. They voted him captain, and some of the parents were like, "He can't be captain." And the coach was like, "Yeah, no, he's captain." And he remembered that, and he was like, that to me, I felt like somebody who could protected me, and so now I'm going to do that. And he went on to become It took him a long time. It took him years actually to move up in leadership in his own youth. But because of his reputation and because everybody knew that he could be counted on, he was elected to the Central Labor Council in the county, at the county level. And so then he built a coalition of folks. So he had UAW locals, he had the garment workers, the Teamsters, and they just built a collection of folks. And he remembers, he's like, I came to Detroit and I talked to some of those guys there, and they formed now, what does NOW stand for?
Letter carriers?
Letter carriers.
No.
North American Labor History Conference? Yeah, next year.
Just the hallway. That was actually really cool. That's part of the reason I wanted to show you my cartoonist there, because all of the political cartoons outside. It doesn't make the.
Was
oh,
it?
yeah. There it is, Negro American
American Labor Council,
Negro
Coleman Young
American-
was in that, yeah.
So Randolph got together and got some folks to do Negro Labor. So he came and met some of those folks here in Detroit, and you're like, what are you doing in your unions? Like, it's really hard. Like I keep running for office, I'm not getting elected. They're like, form your own chapter. And so they got together. So Racine and Kenosha are basically like twin cities, right? And so they got together and they formed a Racine Kenosha Negro American Labor Council, which which were Black union members who were like, we need to shift the AFL, the CIO, then later the AFL CIO, right? We need to make these things more central to what we're going to do to win. Right. So those Black workers, those Black workers really shifted the narrative of what class politics looked like in the city of Racine. And they did it just through a few folks who were really committed to it and who built this like network of union leaders to say, we got to do right on this. We got to do right on this. We got to do right on this. And being willing to speak up and say, this isn't right. Okay, what does right look like? And then adjusting as they went along. So those stories really, to me, and I didn't get a chance to interview Bill either, but his interview, it went on over 3 days, hours and hours and hours, listening to those tapes. And then, so I read it first. And then when I came here, I could actually, because the tapes are here, I was able to listen. And so then I got his inflection and heard his voice and when he was laughing and when he wasn't. And like that, so it's the difference between like a text message and like I never answer a phone call. But so much can get lost in those text messages, right? And so listening to that, I actually went back and I was able to kind of revise some of what I said into the stories that I got the intent, more clearly. Which is why like we have to save our archives. We have to talk to workers and collect their stories because they have the answers. Like, we have the answers. I shouldn't say they as if I'm not also a worker. I should make that really clear. So we have the answers and we know what we need to do. So that was really important. And then they fought really hard for what they call workplace democracy. Being able to make decisions about what was safe, how fast to go. And they really created this in the 1930s and the 1940s. If you think back to Roosevelt's State of the Union address in 1941, right, when he talks about the 4 freedoms. And so people really took that on. And they're like, okay, yeah, freedom from fear. That's something that means something to me. And so what can we do to get this at work? And when they started to get power at work, they're like, we also need power in the community. Because people are making decisions about our lives, about our kids, and we don't have a say in it. We're dependent sometimes because like the cyclical nature of manufacturing, they were out of work. So we would get laid off for months at a time sometimes, working, going down to shorter shifts. And so they had to balance their livelihoods. Wives would have to take extra work in. Like, there was a lot of stuff that had to shift and change. So sometimes they were dependent on charitable organizations, right? And they're like, we don't have a seat on the board of any of these charitable organizations. Like, we deserve this because we make the city. And so they crafted a narrative of it's our right and a responsibility. It's our civic duty. And there was something that was happening in CIO unions at the time that really spread across the Midwest and went out, right? Is that this idea, Bob Bustle talks about it in his book on St. Louis, right? These workers talked about total person unionism. And it's our responsibility to know not just, are you good at work, but are you good at home? Are you good in your community? Are our political leaders doing what we need? Aren't we supposed to be our own political leaders? We need a voice in what's happening. So they ran for city council, for county council, for mayor, and they started to win. And they took over the charitable organizations. They got seats on the board. Black workers kind of took control of the middle class NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. No AI. I know. I'm telling you. Skynet. Y'all know Skynet? It is live. Sarah Connor is not here to save us. We have to save ourselves. If you don't know, find out. Not only that. So Black workers are like, NAACP, you have a middle class approach to what you're doing. You need to come at it from a working class perspective. And they took over NAACP, right? Women organized in their unions. They organized women's bureaus. They took part in large AFL meetings representing what women need at work. And they're like, okay, we have some things, they're sending delegates. They're getting answers. They're bringing it back. They use their city and county boards to say, okay, they're going to change the built environment. They said, what kind of schools do we want for our children? Why aren't the teachers in unions? So the school janitors were organized in union, but the teachers weren't in unions. And so there was this huge debate and fight in the 1930s about get in the union. Teachers like, no, we're professionals. We don't deserve to be in unions. We don't need unions. And then, of course, the janitors are making more money than the teachers. They're like, oops, maybe we should join a union. So the teachers joined a union, right? And so those things really mattered. So I think part of the reason why I say Racine can be a blueprint for what we need to do today is because they took this definition of community and they said, who gets to be in the community? And they kept expanding who those people were. So people who had jobs in the union, if you're looking for a job, you want a job, you're part of our community. And they actually called it labor community. That's not my language, that's the language that they use when they're talking about it. Like our community, us as a community. And so I'm taking their language, I'm not putting it on them, so I'm using their language for what they were talking about in the 30s and the 40s to do this. Black workers use their voice. They said, this isn't right. And it didn't get them a lot, right? So the skilled trades, they kept Black folks out of the apprentice program until the mid 1970s. Right? There was one Black skilled craft worker in a union in 1976. One. Right? They were not letting folks in. At that point, by the time you get to the mid 70s, there's huge Mexican American population in Racine and in Southeast Wisconsin more broadly, right? And those skilled trades, they were all in unskilled positions across different types of industries. And right, unskilled is like a made up term that doesn't really reflect the work that people are doing, just to be clear. But they're like, okay, what are we going to do? Immigrant workers, yep, part of our community. We're here to support you. We're going to work together. Right? So really broadening what they meant by that as they saw things come up, as people brought, hey, you're not being inclusive. Okay, what can we do? And it was not perfect, right? So one of the people who I write about in the book is Corrine Reed Owens. She is nicknamed, right, the Rosa Parks of Racine. She was college educated. She worked as a teacher for many years. When her family moved to Racine, she could not get a job as a teacher because people don't, was what she was told. So she worked as a janitor. She was a leader in the NAACP. And she fought and she helped get Black people, and it just took decades, but Black teachers, Black firefighters, Black police officers, like opened the door to a lot of these pathways to middle class, respectable type jobs for Black workers. Forgive my shorthand on that, right? In an interview, and it was actually a hearing, and the question to her was something to the effect of how great it was that she did this work. She's like, we literally had to march in the street and set fire to be able to rent a house wherever we wanted. This was like, nobody rolled over and said, yeah, come on in. And so I want to make it very clear, I'm saying that Black workers did a lot to shape class politics, and they did, and they reshaped the narrative, but the everyday lived conditions didn't match it. So it was a constant fight. And that's something else that we need to know and recognize today, right? Because right now, they're continuing to attempt to divide working people and say that we don't have the same interests. And there are a lot of people who are saying some pretty words that sound really nice about let's all just get along. But it takes action, it takes continual effort to make it happen. And it made a huge difference. In the 1970s, right before the hospital workers went on strike, a group of conservative folks from the county got together and ran a bunch of candidates to the school board. And they had this platform like we need to save money on taxes or spending too much on school. And really it was a complaint about money going to schools in the city and not out to the county. And they wanted to build new schools because they had just built Mount Pleasant and all these other neighborhoods. And they're like, yeah, we need to get busing out here. So we need to just redistribute some of these funds. And why so much money in the city? Like we need to change this. And the fire department, so over a couple of years, right, they do stop taking care of schools in the city, and the fire department closes an elementary school over winter break because it was unsafe for the kids to come back. Long story short, the labor community got together. So they divided the students up. They had kindergartners and first graders walking over a mile to school, no bus service. So at first the parents were like, okay, we gotta figure it out. So they're like carpooling, doing everything. It wasn't working. So they started a fund. The labor community got together and bought a bus. Bought a bus, gave it to the school district to get the kids to school. During Ronald Reagan's second political for re-election, right, for second term in office, there was this huge debate that was going on in the mid 1980s around immigration, right, and the Mexican myth and these migrant workers taking jobs. And front page of the newspaper in Racine, there's the president of Steelworkers Union saying, "Don't believe the story." Nobody's taking anybody's job. INS, which is the former name of ICE, right, the Immigration Services, raided the plant where Bill used to work. Racine Steel Casings was the name of it in the 1980s. And they arrested, I think, 19 workers and just picked them up, took them to Chicago. And the president of the union was like, nope, every one of them gets their job back and nobody's going back to work until these guys are back at work. We're not going to do it. They got together with the Catholic Church. They got together with Voices de la Frontera, which is the immigrant rights labor organization. And they said, let's all do everything that we can. All but 2 of the people got their jobs back. Some of the folks, right, that got rounded up were actually Jamaican. They just got all brown folks, right? So again, like, this should sound very familiar to you, right? And it was very clear from the beginning that it was a campaign to crush a very strong union that had a lot of support within the immigrant community. And again, these were hard, dirty jobs. And as soon as people could get better jobs, they did. But it was a pathway in, right, to a unionized position. And so Voices de la Frontera, the NAACP, multiple different women's rights groups, all have their offices in the Racine Labor Center. They understand that they are a part of the community and there's no difference in their struggles and in their fights. And part of what I saw was very clear, came through to me, and this is the last thing I'm going to say. I'm going to open it up because I have I want us to have a conversation, and I think I'm going on too long. Adaptation is good. When the political landscape changes, we need to change with it. If we're committed, if we're honestly committed to a multiracial democracy, if we're committed to the ideals of the nation, and we believe that we need to save democracy, we need to shift and change with the times. And when conservatives took power in Wisconsin, the workers in Racine were like, wait. They tried to do this in the 1930s, and we pushed back by doing this. So they knew their history and they talked about it. And then in the 1950s, when they tried to pass a right to work bill, the Racine were like, no, we got to get to Madison. We can't let this pass. They're trying to bring the worst parts of Taft-Hartley to Wisconsin. This can't be. And so they organized. Right? They're like, we can't let us be the reason McCarthy gets reelected. Like, no. Right? And so they got to get like 50 of them put together a pamphlet, like all the reasons why you should vote for this guy. He should not be senator, right? No. Like every step of the way, they're like, we got to pay attention to that. When Tommy Thompson becomes governor, they're like, we got this, y'all. We did it in the 30s. We did it in the 50s. We did it in the 60s. So we can do it, right? And the book ends really on this hopeful moment, and then I have to come back in the epilogue and say, like, they lost, right? But it only looks like a loss when you don't consider the fact that in 2012, when the Democrats are trying to organize, 12,000 people signed up for the working families, right? And they're like, no, we're in it. Like, this is a union town. Like, we might not have unions, but we're in union town, right? We understand class politics, and we understand that we need to push and fight for this working class agenda so that everybody has access to workplace democracy, economic democracy, the agency, the ability, right? That ability to make decisions for yourselves, for your family, for your children, for your communities. What are we going to do in our schools? What are we going to do in our neighborhoods? Those are the kind of things that we can learn from what they did and how they shifted and adapted to the times. How they said, "Oh wait, we're not listening, we're not hearing this, so let's push." And it was a core group of folks who, over generations, they started off as rank and file workers in their unions. They became union leaders. When they retired, they didn't stop. They moved into community organizations. They ran for office. They worked for international unions. And so Ron Thomas, this is the story I was trying to get to. Ron Thomas had a job, I think he was at Hamilton Beach. And they kept promising them that they weren't closing the plant in Racine. And so they're sitting there in a union meeting and they're like, no, you're mistaken, we're not closing. And there's a crew dismantling equipment and packing it up in a truck. Right? And so he's president of the union. He's like, and so they're trying to bargain for a severance package to help folks to learn new jobs and to find new positions, because slowly it becomes harder and harder because all of the plants are closing down, getting smaller, laying folks off. You have a lot of headquarters in Racine, but you don't have actual work being done in Racine, right? And so Ron Thomas is like, I saw the writing on the wall. I did the best I could. They worked and pushed stories in here in the chapter on deindustrialization. He's like, I need to go organize. The only people who have jobs are, and grocery stores were closing and stuff like that, but it's like service workers, nursing homes, grocery stores. So he got a job at SEIU and he started organizing. And he's like, you know what? We knew in the 70s that we had the Racinites at SEIU. And that is what they did. And so when I met SEIU retirees in 2012, protesting at the Capitol in Madison, I was able to go to them and say, what made you represent your union? Why are you here? Why are you doing this? They knew their history, right? And so the key thing I want to walk away with is the political use of the past. If you don't think stories about the past are important, look how they're being twisted. Look how they're trying to be erased. Look how you're trying to be told that working people don't have any power or don't have any access or don't deserve access to some things. But if you know your history, you know it's not true. That if it wasn't for working people, we wouldn't have any of the things that we have that call us free today. Right? It was working people fighting for it, demanding access to it. I mean, you can start with the Bill of Rights, right? And you come all the way up to weekends and time off and paid time off and all of the things that we celebrate now a couple times a year, May Day and Labor Day, depending on who you are and where you are, right? But I think it's really important right now for us to think really broadly about who gets to be in our community, who we want in our community, what democracy looks like, what we want it to look like, how we want it to feel in our day-to-day, everyday lives. And I'll stop there. Thank you. I follow any of my notes. I mean, I did, but not really. But I have a few questions here, but please, I'm open to any questions, thoughts, comments.
Sarah, wow, what a memory.
For 5 seconds.
Thank you for the detailed, inspiring, insightful story that you presented. My question points to this point you brought up, that you have to change to deal with the change that's going on. And I'm wondering, especially with the change in the political parties and looking where the Democrats have been and where they've gone in terms of representing workers and how this community dealt with that. And also these county worker councils that are a little bit they're not on the, I'm wondering about those structures a lot, because I think I've read a few other works about how they became kind of significant in different areas. So yeah, those are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you mind if I go one at a time? I'm not really good at taking questions and then dispersing them. And see, already I'm like, wait, what was the first one? Sorry, I got you though, right? So, so I think it's really important, right? Because right now, Naomi's opinion, nobody else's opinion, there's not a political party that has workers' interests really at its heart right now. And in the 1940s, there's this huge, right? So there's this socialist element in the Milwaukee area, but it's really anti-communist. And there's in Southeast Wisconsin, there's this whole battle within the progressive political movement, and it becomes very tense. And so people realize very quickly, like, we need something, like the Republican Party isn't answering it. Socialists aren't going to come into power. We need to figure something out. How's it gonna play out? And so it was a bunch of it was actually so Gaylord Nelson and those guys who were in law school got together with labor activists and farmers and built this coalition to say, okay, let's revitalize the Democratic Party and then kind of push and win. And so they get Les Aspin elected to the Senate, and then they create a pathway to get Gaylord Nelson elected governor of Wisconsin. And then what does he do? He passes the first ever public worker collective bargaining law in the United States, right, in the state of Wisconsin. And so they really like nurture this relationship. And this is part of what, like, when you hear, I didn't use this language, but it's in the introduction, right? When you hear about the declension narrative of the labor movement, it really is with the breakdown of the New Deal labor order, right? So that labor liberalism falls apart, and like unionists turn inside themselves. But really, it's actually deeper than that. It's a complicated mix of trusting folks who seem to want you as a part of their coalition, but it doesn't really come to anything substantial, but they hold on to it. And so part of, right, and so one of the questions I wanted to ask to audience is like, how do we pivot today, right? Because right now, we don't have a party that has our interests directing a platform. We didn't pass full employment in the 1950s with the Democrats. And labor as a big monolith, right, continues to like tie their coattails to the Democratic Party without any real benefits coming to working people, right? And so that's why you see so many splits and divides. And when you stop looking at labor as one thing and you start looking at labor as a bunch of collections of things, then you see some movement, right? And I think that's really great, because what they did in Racine is they didn't just follow along. So like they're calling people to task. They're like, no. We got all these people to vote for you. You're not doing this. So they did it from the city council to mayor to state to the Senate, right? Like they were constantly, because people like they like to come around on Labor Day. They like to come to the plant doors and say, "We got your back." Like, you didn't go because you voted this way. And that's the importance of political education and like active involvement, right? And that total person unionism, like you're supposed to know what's going on. You're supposed to know how these votes play out. You're supposed to participate in the conversation. But I think some of the things that we've lost along the way are like the labor press. And so we don't have access to journalism that's telling the story from a worker perspective. So we're trusting mainstream, right, media to do that for us. And so what's brilliant is here for 40 years, they had their own newspaper, independent newspaper. And so the Racine Journal-Times would print a story, and Racine Labor would print a story, and you're like, yeah, right? So there's that public debate that we're missing right now. And I think that's part of the problem. I can keep going, but I'm gonna not keep going there so far. But I think a lot of the power comes through, and this is one of the things that we can pay attention to build and do is there's a campaign, a nationwide campaign called Build the Bench. And it's really looking at there's lots of power in local communities. And so if you're paying attention to what's happening in your local community, you can do something. And so that's why central labor councils, these countywide organizations, are really so important, right? Because they can be important. If they're not tied to, right, you got to be really careful, right? Because it's like that relationship, right? So I'm from New Jersey, and yeah, so like my union endorsed one person for governor, right? And the state AFL-CIO endorsed another person, right? And there's this huge split in the governor's race. And so now we're in a position where, you know, we have two starkly different candidates, neither of whom are really committed to doing the things that working people in New Jersey need. So how are we going to continue to fight and grow? But we're doing it at the local level. And I think we're having much more success at the county level in terms of we're getting like not people who are beholden to the Democratic machine so much, winning elections in townships and in county regions that can really shape and do things with people in those areas that are really going to impact their day-to-day lives. So those are the reasons why county, like those smaller groups matter. Then you can build power across the state, build coalitions. Okay. Sorry, I didn't see you, so I'll get you next.
Thank you so much for this. So I am a social work professor, and I work with students to really encourage them to participate in social action and political processes. A very large portion of people who go into social work now really imagine themselves in one-on-one clinical activities that are disconnected from social power. And one of our jobs is to try to convince them that that's not enough, actually, that they won't adequately address any of the issues if they only do that. And so anyway, so I talk to students a lot about a word that I used to like, and I'm starting to age happy. Because
we're all over capacity.
Yeah, and so I think about it because I was talking to students last week about sort of like thinking about what empowers them, what helps their capacity. So if you spend an hour scrolling on Instagram versus an hour at a community meeting, right? One is draining you and not making an impact. One might be enriching you, helping you connect with other people, and so maybe you do have an hour, you're just, you need to think about it. So I'm wondering, in your reading of all of this, listening to people's stories about their lives, like historically and now, lots of people with very challenging personal circumstances, incredibly physically and emotionally and dangerous jobs, like strenuous jobs, did all, like we're also participating in major risky, in some cases, political action and collective action. And I'm getting, fairly privileged students, but who are living in a time that it is stressful, right? I mean, I think it comes into our cores, and I understand that, but I'm trying to help them see that many people have always felt this way. Like, this is not like, it is bad, and I acknowledge that, but it is an enduring problem, actually, if people have found a way to participate. And so I just wanted to see, like, what, if anything, people talked about, like, what this work brought to them, what, gave them the energy to participate in these things, and how to, like, push back on students with compassion for, like, and our own selves, to help kind of get past this I don't have capacity excuse that I hear about just a lot. I'm hearing it a lot, and I think since COVID, it's just become no one wants to leave their house, and I feel like we have to if we plan. But
yeah, and I think we're using that, right, and really what we mean is we don't have hope. Right. I think there's a difference. There's a difference about, do you have a community around you? Okay. And it doesn't have to be big. Like there are like 6 people who were a crew from the time they were in high school until, they retired from their second job, right? And their second job is being the community activist. Because I'm telling you, for generations, they went to work and then they started like Tony, after he retired, he was an international representative for UAW, and then he was a part of the Citizen Labor Coalition, and they're fighting right for utility bills. And then this was he was a part of that organization during the savings and loans crisis when everybody, it was like 2008, but in the 80s, and millions of people lost their homes. And they were trying to like save the community, but it took a heavy toll on them. I talked to Tom, and he's like, my dad was never. And he said he recounted a story to me of asking his mother if his dad was going to make it to one of his games, and she said, no, I'm sorry. And he was like, it's okay. And he's like, I never resented the fact that he was never there because I knew what he was doing. He's like, but honestly, I didn't really see it until he passed away. He's like, there were so many people at his funeral. They completely shut down the street, and hours of cars just drove by, as if it was like a presidential, viewing or something like that. And this is Kenosha, right? They like the whole town of Kenosha stopped so that they can honor his dad, and he was like, I was overwhelmed with emotion. And his dad at that time had dementia, and he hadn't been in the community for a year, and it didn't matter, right? And Tony was a child of the Great Depression, and he never wanted he didn't want another community to go through that. And so he put everything into it, right? But it took him away from his family, right? I talked to children of women who were really active in the packing workers in the Chicago area, and they say they have similar stories, right? Like they were never there. But I think that there was something about being a part of the community that they gave each other strength, and they sustained each other and lifted each up. So often what we do, it feels isolating. It feels like, before I came here, I was in a meeting, and then I was in a meeting, and I was like, I actually told my union, I'm like, I can't come to the bylaws committee. I'm sorry. Like, here are my thoughts on this proposal, but I can't sit through this meeting right now. But it's all on Zoom, right? So I'm in my office, or I'm at home, and it's such a violation, right? I'm like, I don't want to be my sanctuary, but I'm like sitting on Zoom meeting, so, like 8 o'clock at night is bedtime, like. But right, I find hope right now today, because when I do show up, there are other people there doing the work, and that gives me energy, right? And so, like, I'll be at the next bylaws meeting, right? And we're doing great work, because part of what we're doing in changing our bylaws is like we went on the faculty at Rutgers went on strike and the other day. Last year, 2023. It seems like I want to say 2023. That seems like 2 years ago, and I was like, that was a long time.
A week is a long time, right?
So we looked at 2023, and then something came out of that, and realized, we don't have racial justice principles. We need to be careful, and some things happen in the graduate student Slack, right? So, we like, okay, we have to put some online etiquette things into our bylaws, right? And so that's why we're meeting, and that's why we're doing it. So it's like good work, right? But it's also exhausting, and it's too easy for everybody to say there's so many things, right? There's famine, there's genocide, there's war, like there's not enough to eat, everything is too expensive. We work too much, too fast, and we're not getting anything out of it, right? And so when you think about it, and that's what I meant when I said that we individualize structural problems, right? And so what we need to do is understand that we can't, as individuals, solve a structural issue. And we shouldn't put it on individuals. We shouldn't put it on people who are victimized or marginalized or shut out to solve their own problems. But the honest part of it is like they already know the answer. They know what needs to happen for them to be free. And they just need a platform and they just need support, right? And if we can't depend on our government to level the playing field so that we actually have economic democracy, then we need to put the situation into position so that our government has no choice but to honor our commitment to economic democracy. And we can't do that without coming together in community. So we have to think about it as, am I over capacity or am I feeling hopeless? And what can I do to help my hopelessness? And that might shift it.
I just wanted to say that's pretty cool. Kind of next to my question, sort of. I also have this problem with my friends, like with recent political situations that are happening. A lot of them kind of have this feeling that like, oh, there's nothing to do. But like there is stuff that we can do because the civil rights movement also, that was the people started out small in their communities. And they started to, slowly involve themselves in that, slowly started to grow to a national scale. And I feel like for a lot of that, though, it's this feeling that, oh, there's nothing that we can do. A lot of them don't really understand necessarily have the history that of the, how it started at like such a small scale. And basically what I wanted to get to is, we as people who like work at university or go to university have kind of this privilege to not only have the time to read and write all about, the history, but also we have access to it, in JSTOR and all these other institutions that have a paywall lock behind it. So I wanted to ask, to these people who maybe aren't studying history or don't even have a college education, how do we make this information that, people have done this before, we can do it today? How do we get that information to them when they don't necessarily have these privileges to access this information?
Yeah, and so what I tell students and workers when I'm speaking to them is that when you learn something, go back to your network and share that information. And I try to show folks how like that information is available to you. I love using TikTok videos in class, right? You can learn a lot. The information is there and it's about democratizing, right, access to education. And so, I don't allow students to call me Dr. Williams or Professor Williams. I ask them to call me Naomi. I ask them to co-create our syllabus. So I'm teaching Black workers this semester. What industries do you want to talk about? And you vote and you tell me, and then I curate some material and then you bring your lived experience in. And so I run my classroom as if it's a public education space. And then I give them my time, right, in the public. So the People's Forum in New York City is a great place for community organizers. I give my time by giving them history lessons and showing them how to talk to each other. I show workers how to interview each other so that they can get each other's stories. And I work with other storytellers, right, who do storytelling training. And I try to get folks to know that, like, even if you feel like you don't know anything, you know your life. And you gain experience and knowledge. And you need to own it and ask questions, even if it's just asking your parents or asking people in your community information, and then bring that back and using it, right? And so I think people feel more empowered when they feel invested in, oh, right, I'm participating in this knowledge creation. So it's really about that. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. So Danita's sitting over there. I can talk to her for hours about, some segment of something, and then we can go to a movie or a show. It should be like, oh, like Theodore Roosevelt and the cult of masculinity in the early days. I'm like, how the hell did you pick that up? Right? So we can't ignore the fact that popular culture, right? Artists, musicians, songwriters, poets, comedians, right? That's knowledge. And so we need to expand it, but also everybody needs access to higher ed. And higher ed is under attack right now. And so we need to do as much as we can to democratize these spaces so more people feel welcome, can afford to do this, can afford to sit, right? To sit and think. Think about all the people right now, all the brilliant folks who don't have access to this, who are doing amazing things in their own communities. And like, we don't know, right? And so it's just being open from both sides. And there, to me, professors, I'll be honest with you, who sit in their office and do whatever and write books and get checks and like talk to corporations and don't think about the fact, and you know, stand and talk to you about something that they were talking about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, as if it still mattered. But they're not, everybody's not like that. And so you just have to find your folks and you have to broaden what you think about as education.
Hi, thank you. Or someone else.
No, I was saying you next. Sorry.
Confused very easily. You're doing great. Thank you so much for coming. I'm in fifth class and we are doing a oral history report. I really appreciated what you said about trying to get life history and how that impacts it. Is there any advice you would try and give to someone doing an oral history or something that really helped you while you were doing this?
It's not extractive. Which is why I do life histories, because so many folks like, oh, you want to come hear about all my problems? Oh, you want to hear about the bad shit that happened at work? Like, I got kids. I had fun last night at the game, right? You know, so you can't just like say, I need this for my class to answer these 10 questions. Thanks, bye. Oh, can I take a picture for proof that I was here? Right? Like that's how you do it. You build a relationship, and right. So for class, it's different, right? But as a social justice researcher, I embed myself in a community. I show up to their events. I do my part to help them with whatever they're working on, and then when they have time and space, I say, hey, you know, can I be a part of this? I do my research first. So I don't come in asking questions. I make sure I know what I don't know and I find out as much as I can about what I do. And then I show them that I've done my research by asking them intelligent questions. Sometimes, right? So sometimes I remember I was interviewing a poet laureate. I kept interrupting him to ask him a question because I was trying to ask a question. He was telling me a story that I didn't understand how it fit. And he's like, I'm weaving a tip. Yes, please continue. And so I just shut up, right? And I just listened. And I was talking to somebody else. And at the end, I was like, is there something I didn't ask that you think you want to tell me? And he was like, yeah, I got this whole box over here, and it has all this stuff from the radio broadcast in 1960 when we were on strike. Would you like those transcripts? Yes, please. Those transcripts, right? So to just be open, and again, like this isn't something you're studying. This is a person who you're trying to build community with, and if you approach it that way, right, and you make sure you have their consent, and you show up honestly, I think that's the best thing that you can do. And it takes a lot of time. And then something that I do is I always offer them the product. So everybody who interviewed, I just mailed them a copy of the book. I told them, thank you. I gave them their interview. So they had a hard copy, they had a digital audio version of it. So that they could use it, they could do whatever they wanted with it. So just to share the product with them. I let a few people read chapters and give me feedback on it. And I will let you know in a few months what they think about it. We'll go talk to them.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed listening to you. And I have like a kind of comment over Tessa's question, and then I have a question for you. And then the comment was like, in terms of capacity, right? Like, I think a big question for the people organizing is like, what kind of experience are people having? And like, you know, what you expressed so powerfully was that people got an experience of democracy. They got an experience where their thoughts mattered, their actions mattered, their presence mattered. And there's so many spaces where that doesn't happen. And that can include classrooms, workplaces, whatever. And I think it's like, what can we be doing that people are getting filled up when they come and feel like they're getting something that they can't get anywhere else from their work together. I mean, like that's hard, but like that's, that's, I think, one of the goals that helps build capacity is that you feel like I have to go here because this is where I can be X, Y, and Z, right? And I don't get that at work. And then I had a question about the words like that came up, like blueprint, use word platform, word base. Like obviously these were shitty jobs, right?
All jobs are shitty jobs.
And most jobs are shitty jobs. That's why they're jobs, right? They don't call it a party. But they did have, like, for a lot of people, the type of either stability or mobility or both that you could, people got laid off and they weren't as stable as people think, but they were, and they were happening at a time of much greater economic and social equality in America than we have now. People could make some kind of life out of these jobs, even though they were hard. And Jamie's research has been so influential to me on the queer history of the UAW, how important building and supporting queer communities was through the fact of the paycheck and what that afforded. And then even just afford that you could stay in one place and build community. Where is our base now? We don't have jobs that allow people to stay in one place or stay in one job. And that's really, really what I struggle. And somebody who's been, just another thing that I'm thinking of that I want to put to you, like, we talk about like organizing to get what we need, and total personal unionism is kind of like that, right? And as somebody who's been organizing mutual aid efforts, like I read a piece for the class that Martha's in today about capitalism, where we read about, the mutual aid involved with, Black Panthers doing health clinics, for people doing HIV/AIDS work. And that's really necessary. But then at some point, you're like, we're just providing what is not being given to us, right? And at what point do we actually retake the power and resources that we need to have the things that we need? So can you speak to that question of like the material base for this community and how we find our place that we can stay?
Right now? Or
Yeah, right now. I mean, it's reference to back now if you want, but I'm really interested in right now. Yeah.
And so I'm gonna start at the beginning, but if I'm not on track to the very first point, like pull me back, right? The capacity and hope. Can you ask me the first part again?
Well, the first part was just like, yeah, like what builds capacity is giving people like transformative experiences of actual democracy.
I wanted to connect the two. Thank you. Yeah, so some of it's material.
Mhm.
We're not gonna say we're saying mutual aid, right? We're beyond that.
Yeah.
Right. We actually need to we need to flip it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We need access to more so that we can distribute it differently. But what we do get by coming together is strength and community, right? And I mean community in the sense of feeling connected to someone someplace. So even in my union meetings, if I'm leading the meeting, if I'm I just stepped down from the e-board, the executive committee of my union, but right, in committee meetings and stuff like that, we don't start with, okay, here's the agenda, these are things we're gonna do. How are you? Like, did you hear what happened yesterday? Did your students, it's mostly faculty, right? So that our jobs are like connected to making sure students are okay. Like, did your student get what they needed from this? So we start with let's solve some of the small things, let's check in with each other, and then let's get to work, let's do the work, right? And then let's build. And I think right now, what we need to do is to build connections across groups. Because we can't reinvent the wheel here and then reinvent the wheel there, and then like everybody's reinventing wheels and we never build anything together, right? We're never going anywhere.
It's got a bunch of wheels.
I want to be in the wagon at some point.
Sure.
My feet up. So what does that look like, right? And so I'll just give you an example. So I'm working in my union. I'm doing that work. But I'm also connected with another organization, Higher Ed Labor United, which is about building unions for all workers on all higher ed campuses in the United States, right? So that's about building capacity. And we have 3 different things, right? So we're trying to unionize workers who aren't already unionized. We're trying to strengthen workers who are unionized. We're trying to build them together so they understand that they're working together. And then it's not just faculty, but it's faculty, staff, it's students, it's community members. What's happening in this region, right? We're your partners here. And we're bringing all of those folks together so that we can do pattern bargaining. So everybody in higher ed is bargaining at the same time for things that we need in our area, in our region, right? We have a policy agenda. What kind of policies are we pushing for, right? We would need to push action items to our politicians, right? So that's another avenue where we're trying to maneuver as well. And so like that is one of the ways where I feel like, okay, that's giving me something more than just like what's happening right here, and this is desperate and this is going on, right? So we're fighting for academic freedom, but academic freedom isn't just about academic freedom, it's about job security, it's about community needs, it's about you're not going to spend our money and our resources on this particular thing when this thing is happening, and you're not going to use our money for this horrible thing over here, right? And so it's until we have capacity, we can't do that, so we're building capacity. And I'm working with the Critical Legal Collective, which is, and this goes back to the social worker question, right? So they're law professors and they're like, oh, what can we do? Oh, I don't know, maybe I'll write a brief. And it's like, you have so much power. Like you can do so much more. Yes, writing briefs is important, right? Getting people ready to give testimony. Yes, that's important. But also, why aren't you in a part of your faculty union? Why aren't you teaching your law students in clinics, how to help people keep their homes? And what does that look like when you're actually doing real, help me out, when you're stopping ICE, right?
Direct action.
Direct action, right? So to get off your butt and actually go meet the folks where they are, and your immigration clinic is now we're going out into the streets and we're saving everybody we can. We're stopping the kidnappings, right? So like, what does that look like? And let me be clear and say I'm not speaking for the Critical Collective here.
On the advice of counsel.
Not a lawyer. This isn't even legal advice. So let me be really clear about that. But also, right? So, but again, right? So these law professors, like, what can we do? Like, we're desperate, right? And it's really very powerful to hear a judge in North Carolina, like, I know what you can do. You can get the bar association to help protect my job because I'm getting death threats because I'm passing, I'm making decisions that support the law. Right. And, we have doctors who are trying to provide healthcare to women, right? Like protect the doctors, like there are actual action items that you can use, but you don't know about it if you're just in your silo. So looking outside of your silo, building wide coalitions, right? Labor educators, we need to stop just talking to union members, right? Yes, that's a great thing to do, but there are more people are not in unions. Lots more. And there are a lot of people who are working right now who are desperate, who don't have any answers, who don't know their history, who don't know, like, I have a right to this. Like, that's an actual right that I'm not getting, that I'm supposed to have, right? Yeah. And so even just these basic things, like to get people to ask questions about how do they stop internalizing what they feel as desperation, right? And so labor educators, there's a whole network of us who are sharing resources so that we can have conversations across the political spectrum to really talk to different working people outside of political parties and talk about economic democracy. And what does that look like? And I think that gives me hope, right? Because this is this way to kind of build and grow. And I think this gets back to your base question as well, and to a platform, what we need. We don't know what we need until we all get together and ask each other, what do you need? What do you want? What do you think is most important to fight for? And then what we do is we center the voice of the most vulnerable. And if we can protect the most vulnerable amongst us and forget about this stupid zero-sum theory as if there's not enough for everybody, and we make sure the person who's the most vulnerable has the most safety, then we're all safe. And we can all grow. But we have to share that message, and we have to create that. And it's gonna take a lot, right? Because those of us with a lot of privilege, right, we're hunkering down, putting our heads in the sand, trying to wait it out. And we're not in a space right now where we can wait anything out. We actually need to come together in community and shift, right? And then create a different platform for what we want it to look like. And it's just gonna take a lot of work, but I think there are moving pieces in ways that everybody's like, oh, there's too much to do, there are too many different positions. Well, you're good at one thing. Focus on that one thing and then talk to somebody else who's doing something else. Share what you know and pass it on, and then keep going from there. And I think that's how we do it. People say I'm naive and overly hopeful, but also I see all of these people doing these things in different places, right? Like what's happening in Chicago, what's happening in LA, what's happening in Massachusetts. I'm like, okay, I'm ready, I'm here. And I'm really proud of our rapid response efforts in New Jersey as well. I think we're doing a lot of good work there. We're doing less well in some other things, right? But we're learning, folks, and you have to be willing to learn, and you have to be willing to be open to hearing that. And I think that's how we build it. So it's just a matter of like finding those people and building connections with them. Did that?
No, that was an amazing answer. Thank you. I got so much there. Appreciate it.
So my question is, in this current administration and cultural climate context, there's a lot of hesitancy for a lot of people when it comes to wanting to organize and form communities around the actually physical safety of doing these things. When you have ICE, when you have, students getting grabbed off the streets for speaking up against Palestine, and all these fears, I think, are a big conversation that's happening right now alongside like certain demographics, different groups wanting to organize, but facing those fears and feeling like it's not safe to even ask for rights in the workplace, let alone like your constitutional rights to be protected. And I'm curious if there was any examples from when you were looking into Racine's history, because obviously organizing as Black and immigrant workers throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on, there was also fears of that extent as well. It was not in a climate that was pro, person of any color or pro women. And I was just wondering if there were any examples that you had from your research and like how organizers were able to overcome those fears, like inoculate people against these concerns, and how it could be applied into today's political climate.
Let me start with, I think right now, there's a lot to be afraid about, right? I was nervous about coming here, to be honest with you. A friend of mine at Texas State University was fired for saying what I said today, right? And Tom is, but his, like we're raising money to help his family as he does his legal fight to get his job back. He had tenure, didn't matter. They were like, bye. His union has a lawyer, legal representation for him, pro bono. So like privilege, right? A lot that so many people don't have. But I also want to say that there are more people who are on the side of right than aren't. And we see them every day. And I think that we're letting the news and the media and the horror of the actual horror of what's happening freeze us when everywhere you look, people are fighting back. Mm-hmm. And I think that because we don't have independent press, like we're missing some of that. And that's the good and bad too of social media, because I have been very careful with the algorithm, so I had a lot of feel good stuff coming my way. And then I keep mainstream news over there. So I wanna caution us to don't let this culture of fear thing take over from what you see in your everyday life, right? And it's dangerous, and you know, it's very dangerous. And there's a lot of work to do. In the past, things were pretty desperate, right? So people were shot and killed by private security forces, and that's part of why you need to know your history, right? Because when you understand that my uncle was shot in the back by the Kohler company, then you know why you're on the picket line. Because somebody literally lost their life to give you access to this job that's giving you something, right? And they weren't good jobs, but we made them, they made them, right? We make them good jobs because of the way we fight for democracy at work, right? That's what turns them into something that's doable until we can like retire. That's a thing anymore. Right, but that's what made it good. That's what moved us into like a middle class lifestyle, even with the ups and downs and all of that, right? It was that fight. So people lost their lives and continued to fight, and their families fought, and their communities fought, and they rallied around each other. And during the Kohler strike in the 1950s, right, it got really ugly. A couple of, you know, some business historians have made the case, and political historians have made the case that like that fight and Walter Reuther, right, defending himself in the congressional hearing because of the Kohler strike and pulling out the UAW records and showing them and saying, look, we didn't do anything wrong, right? And he won his argument, like he proved himself right. And ultimately it didn't matter because conservative forces used that event to push through laws. And that's why they tried to pass the right to work law in 1954 is really based on there were some private companies and conservative business leaders who really kind of led the way in the business roundtable that reshaped politics at the time. And so it was never a given that things were going to be okay, and they continued to fight. But it was the continued effort at fighting that mobilized them to keep pulling these stories out over and over and over again, because it wasn't easy. And everybody's like, oh, 1950s, yeah. No, they were right? And Dan Clark has a great book it's called Disruption in Detroit that really highlights like things were not easy in the 1950s. In Racine, right? So UAW Local 150 at the Case Company, UAW Local 180 at the Case Company, right? They never had dues check off, right? So that their dues payment wasn't coming directly from their paycheck. They fought for that, weren't getting it. The managers did everything possible to say like, no, we have our prerogative to do whatever we want. You're not going to get any of this stuff. And so everybody else in the city had it. The largest local, the most powerful local, didn't have those basic rights in their collective bargaining agreement with the company. And so because they had to constantly, like every time it was time to renew, it was a fight. It kept the momentum going. So it was just a continued energy. Like we can't back down. We have to keep doing this. We have to keep doing this. And they had to keep telling the story. And so in the 1980s, Kelly Sparks is president of the UAW, and he's in the archives. He's at the Wisconsin Historical Society. And the archivist is like, hey, you want me to show you? He's like, no. Look, I'm just trying to get some stuff so I can tell the guys what they need to do to get back so that we can do this fight. Right? And so he would write articles for their labor paper, just detailing their history and highlighting different workers and making sure, right? So it was like, they did a great job. Look at this nice Mexican American, Mr. Diaz. He's been here since 1938, and his grandfather worked here. Just saying, just trying to introduce folks to the idea that, what you're hearing isn't really true. There's not, some Mexican menace coming to steal your job. These people belong here. Doesn't matter if they got here yesterday or 3 generations ago. they deserve to be here and they deserve their jobs. So that constant fight over the decades really kind of sustained this movement. Even when they didn't win, they knew they were on the right side of the fight. And I think that's part of the thing that we're missing. Now they're like, oh, we didn't win. Oh, well, what are we gonna do? Let's go sit and debate why we didn't win. Let's get back to work, right? Let's get back to work. And that's what they kept doing, is they kept getting back to work. And I think that was part of it. But it was ugly. People lost their lives, people lost their families, their homes. They gave up a lot to get some things, right? And that, right? So the transportation center where people go to get their bus transfers in Racine is named after Corinne Reed Owens, right? All she wanted to do was be a teacher. She never got to use her degree, really. And so by the time it's time for her to retire, she finally gets like the job she deserves. But she spent her whole adult life in Racine making sure other people didn't have to go through that. William Jenkins tried to buy a house with his wife. Very light-skinned woman was his wife. She'd go look at a house. Okay, fine. He'd show up. Yeah, no. Dude, like leader in the community, couldn't buy a house where he wanted in the city. Right? So there were always these things that kept motivating people to say, we can do better, and make a difference. And so I think it's that sustained effort in community, which has really inspired them to keep going despite the things that were happening. Like some of the things that I really just admired reading about is the anti-apartheid debates in the 1980s and how they played out in the labor press. It was really like even in terms of the Cold War politics and Vietnam. And so you had these young workers who are like, we're on the wrong side. Like our unions are supporting crushing working people in other places in the world. Like this can't be right. And because they have a labor press, they're having a debate play out in public. So people get more access to the facts and then they can form their own opinions. Right. And they can say, oh, my union, even though some people have one view, some people have another view, we're talking about it and debating it. And it didn't tear the union apart. But we're so careful. We're like, oh, you can't say that. We might offend somebody. Oh, we gotta be quiet, we gotta be moderate. That has gotten us nowhere. Right. And so part of the thing that I really love, it was like they kept getting in trouble. So they keep getting all these letters saying like, you're breaking the agreement. Like, can you tell your union members to get back there? Like, no, like we did our collective bargaining in the shop, sitting down, stopping. Work stoppage after work stoppage. Like we promised no work stoppages, work stoppage. They took our vacation pay, work stoppage, sit down, right? And they let it play out like that. And they broke the rules. And now we're all, oh, we can't be that. Oh, Robert's Rules of Orders. We got a constitution. Like, no, like they're literally starving us to death. They're literally kidnapping people in the street. Right?
I think what we'll do is that we'll call that the last question. And we still have the room for 15 minutes. Please hang around, talk to each other. But I think it's really important that we think,
Thank you for engaging in conversations. This is important work, and I'll come hear your question.
So, as someone who's